A normal Tuesday morning, Natalie Rivers stood in front of her classroom, chalk dust coating her fingertips as she explained the beauty of impressionist brushstrokes to 20 bored teenagers. Teaching art at Boston Public High School was never glamorous, but it filled her heart. At 34, she had learned to find joy in small victories, a student finally understanding perspective, or the quiet satisfaction of watching young minds discover creativity. Her phone buzzed during lunch break. An unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "It's Rivers. This is Thomas Caldwell from Caldwell and Associates legal firm. I'm calling regarding the estate of Richard Townsend." Her sandwich dropped onto the table. Richard Townsend. That name hit her like a wave of memories she had carefully tucked away. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake," Natalie whispered, her voice barely steady. "No mistake. Miss Rivers, Mr. Townsend passed away 2 weeks ago. His will specifically requests your presence at the reading this Friday at 2 o'clock. The address is 847 Beacon Hill Drive." The call ended, leaving Natalie staring at her phone in disbelief. 3 years. Earlier, Richard Townsend had been a name whispered in Boston's art circles with reverence. Museum benefactor, private collector, a man whose personal gallery held pieces that museums could only dream of acquiring. When Natalie had been hired as a temporary consultant to catalog some newly acquired paintings, she expected a brief, professional encounter. What she found instead was a lonely widower who saw art not as investment, but as conversation with the soul. Their first meeting had been formal. Richard, tall and dignified, with silver hair and kind eyes, had walked her through his private gallery. But when they stopped in front of a forgotten Mary Cassatt piece, something shifted. Natalie spoke about the painting with such passion, such genuine understanding, that Richard actually smiled. "Everyone sees dollar signs," he had said quietly. "You see the human heart behind the canvas." What started as a 2-week consulting job stretched into 6 months. Natalie would arrive at the Townsend mansion twice a week, ostensibly to work on the catalog. But their sessions always dissolved into long conversations about art, beauty, loss, and dreams deferred. Richard told her about his late wife, Catherine, who had died 5 years earlier. How the house felt like a museum now, beautiful but lifeless. His children visited only when they needed money or wanted to discuss their inheritance. Natalie shared her own story. The art degree she had earned while working 3 jobs. The gallery position she had lost during the recession. The slow acceptance that she would never be the celebrated artist she once dreamed of becoming, but could still spread beauty through teaching. "Dreams don't die," Richard had told her one evening as they sat in his study, rain pattering against the windows. "They transform into something more honest." There had been no romance between them, nothing improper, but there had been something deeper, harder to name. A meeting of souls, a recognition. 2 people who understood that true wealth was found in moments of genuine connection, not bank accounts. The decision to attend Friday arrived too quickly. Natalie stood in front of her closet, unsure what to wear to the will reading of a man she barely knew, yet somehow understood completely. She chose a simple navy dress, the one she wore to gallery openings, pulled her brown hair into a neat bun. The Townsend mansion looked exactly as she remembered. 3 stories of red brick and white columns. Perched on Beacon Hill like a crown, Mrs. Albright, the housekeeper, answered the door. Her eyes widened with recognition. "Miss Rivers." "Oh, he hoped you would come. Please, come in." The elderly woman's warmth was a brief comfort before Natalie entered the sitting room where others had already gathered. The atmosphere froze the moment she walked in. Penelope Townsend stood by the fireplace, impeccably dressed in black designer clothes, her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon. Her brother Wesley sat in a leather chair, his suit probably worth more than Natalie's monthly salary. Both stared at her with identical expressions of cold confusion. "Who is this?" Penelope asked, her voice sharp. "I'm Natalie Rivers. I received a call about the will reading." Rivers. Wesley frowned. "Father never mentioned anyone by that name." "I worked with your father 3 years ago cataloging his art collection." Penelope's expression shifted to something between amusement and disdain. "Oh, the art teacher." I remember now. Father mentioned hiring someone local for some project. I'm surprised you're here. The lawyer, Thomas Caldwell, entered before Natalie could respond. He was a serious man in his 50s, carrying a leather folder that seemed to hold the weight of expectations. Thank you all for coming. Shall we begin? The gathering storm. Natalie took a seat in the corner, feeling very small and very out of place. Penelope and Wesley sat front and center, their posture radiating entitlement. A few other relatives and business associates filled the remaining chairs. Mr. Caldwell opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and began to read in a measured tone. Richard James Townsend, being of sound mind and body. Do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Formalities continued. Small bequests to staff members. Mrs. Albright received a generous pension that made her eyes fill with tears. Some charitable donations. Business assets divided among various entities. Penelope tapped her manicured nails against her chair. Impatient for the main event? To my children, Penelope and Wesley, I leave $2 million each, to be held in trust. Penelope's face went white. $2 million each? What about the house? The collection. Wesley leaned forward. There must be more. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat and continued reading, his voice carrying Richard's words from beyond the grave. The Townsend Mansion. Its contents and my entire private art collection, valued at approximately $18 million. I leave to Miss Natalie Rivers. The room exploded. Natalie felt the floor tilt beneath her. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. This is absurd. Penelope shot to her feet. She was an employee. She worked here for what, a few months? This is fraud. Wesley was already on his phone, likely calling his own lawyer. Natalie's hands trembled. I don't understand. I never asked for anything. I haven't even spoken to him in 3 years. Mr. Caldwell raised his hand for silence. There's more. Mr. Townsend left a letter, specifically for Miss Rivers. He handed her a cream-colored envelope with her name written in Richard's distinctive handwriting. Everyone watched as Natalie opened it with shaking fingers. The letter began simply, Dear Natalie, if you're reading this, then I've run out of time to say this in person. The letter that explained everything. Natalie's hands trembled as she read Richard's letter silently, aware of every hostile eye in the room watching her. The words blurred through her tears, but his voice came through clearly, as if he were sitting beside her once more. Dear Natalie, if you're reading this, then I've run out of time to say this in person. I imagine you're confused, perhaps angry that I've placed this burden on you. My children are likely furious, and I don't blame them for their shock. But please let me explain. In my 72 years, I built an empire. I collected art worth fortunes. I raised 2 children and loved one extraordinary woman. But in my final years, I realized I had become a curator of beauty without truly seeing it anymore. Until you walked into my gallery that spring afternoon, you reminded me why I started collecting in the first place. Not for investment or status, but because art is humanity's attempt to capture the sacred. You saw each painting as someone's soul made visible. You taught me to look again with wonder. These past 3 years since you left, I've thought often about our conversations. About how you chose teaching over pursuing fame because you wanted to plant seeds of beauty in young hearts. That's true wealth, Natalie. That's legacy. My children love me, but they love what I represent more. They see my collection as assets to liquidate, not treasures to protect. You're the only person I trust to be the guardian of what I've spent a lifetime gathering. Not to hoard it, but to share it the way you shared your passion with me. Do with it what your heart tells you. I only ask that you remember our conversations about making beauty accessible, not imprisoned behind velvet ropes. You once said every child deserves to stand in front of a masterpiece. Make that happen, Natalie. That's my real wish. Thank you for seeing me as a person, not a portfolio. You gave an old man his joy back. Now I'm giving you the means to spread that joy further than I ever could. With gratitude and deep respect, Richard. Natalie looked up, tears streaming down her face. The room had gone silent, waiting. Would you read it aloud? Mr. Caldwell asked gently. She did, her voice breaking several times. By the end, even some of the business associates looked moved. But Penelope's expression had transformed from shock to cold fury. "The accusations begin. This is manipulation," Penelope said, her voice like ice. She clearly took advantage of an elderly man. Father was lonely after mother died. Vulnerable. She saw an opportunity. "It's not true," Natalie whispered. "I never asked for anything. I didn't even know he was thinking about this." Wesley stood, his face red. "You worked for him for 6 months. 6 months, and somehow you convinced him to cut his own children out of their inheritance? What exactly were you doing during those catalog sessions?" The implication hung in the air like poison. "Stop it." Mrs. Albright spoke up from the corner, her voice fierce despite her age. "I was there. I saw every interaction. Miss Rivers treated Mr. Townsend with nothing but respect and kindness. She made him laugh again. She made him remember why he loved art in the first place. She made him change his will." Penelope snapped. Mr. Caldwell intervened. "The will was changed 14 months ago, long after Miss Rivers stopped working here. Mr. Townsend was examined by 3 different doctors who all certified his mental competence. This document is legally sound, and we'll challenge it in court," Wesley said flatly. "We'll tie this up for years if we have to." Natalie stood abruptly, the letter clutching in her hand. "Keep it, all of it. I don't want any of this. I came because I was asked to, not because I expected anything." She moved toward the door, desperate to escape, but Mr. Caldwell's voice stopped her. "Miss Rivers, I should mention one more thing. Mr. Townsend anticipated this reaction. He left recorded testimony explaining his decisions, and he established an irrevocable trust. The mansion and collection go to you regardless of any challenge. He was very thorough." Flashback to their last conversation that night. Alone in her small apartment, Natalie couldn't sleep. She kept remembering the last time she had seen Richard 3 years ago. It had been autumn. She had completed the catalog and was preparing to return to full-time teaching. They sat in his study one final evening, drinking tea and watching the sun set over Boston. "I'm going to miss these conversations," Richard had said quietly. "Me too. But I need to get back to my students. They're waiting for me. You really love teaching, don't you? Even though the pay is terrible and the recognition is non-existent?" Natalie had smiled. "I love watching someone discover their own creativity. Last week, a student who never spoke in class showed me a painting she made at home. It was raw and honest and beautiful. That moment, seeing her face light up when I told her how good it was, that's worth more than any gallery opening." Richard had been quiet for a long moment. "You know what I regret most? I collected all this beauty, but I kept it locked away. Only people wealthy enough to attend private viewings ever saw most of these pieces. I told myself I was preserving them, but really, I was hoarding them." "It's not too late to change that," Natalie had said, "isn't it? I'm 70 years old. My children are waiting for me to die so they can auction everything off. They've already talked to Sotheby's. Did you know that? They think I don't hear them, but I do. And don't let them. Find another way. Create a foundation. Start a public program. Do something that would make these paintings accessible to people who need beauty in their lives." Richard had looked at her with such intensity then. "What if I told you I wanted you to do that? After I'm gone?" Natalie had laughed, thinking he was joking. "Richard, I'm a public school teacher. I don't have the resources or connections for something like that, but you have the vision and the heart. That's rarer than resources." She hadn't understood then that he was serious, that he was already planning to give her the means to make that vision real. The media stormed by Monday morning. The story had leaked. "Art teacher inherits fortune from elderly collector," screamed the headlines. The tabloids were worse. Beauty and the benefactor. Did love or manipulation change a will? Natalie arrived at school to find reporters camped outside. Her principal called her into the office with a concerned expression. "Natalie, these allegations, are they true?" "Which allegations?" "That I worked for Richard Townsend?" "Yes." "That I manipulated him?" "Absolutely not." "The school board is concerned about the publicity. Perhaps you should take a leave of absence until this settles down." It felt like the walls were closing in. Everywhere she turned, people assumed the worst. Old friends looked at her with suspicion. Parents at the school whispered when she walked by. Even some of her students seemed confused, as if they didn't know her anymore. Only her best friend, Rachel, stood by her without question. "Anyone who knows you knows this is garbage," Rachel said over coffee. "You're the most honest person I've ever met. You still feel guilty about taking an extra napkin at Starbucks, but what if they're right to question it?" Natalie said miserably, "Maybe I did influence him somehow without realizing it. Maybe I should have kept more distance." "Stop it. You were kind to a lonely man. You shared something beautiful with him. That's not manipulation. That's basic human decency. The fact that he recognized your character and wanted to reward it doesn't make you a villain." Discovering Richard's true intentions, Caldwell called her that week, asking her to come to the mansion. "There are some things you need to see," he said mysteriously. When she arrived, Mrs. Albright greeted her warmly and led her to Richard's private study. The room smelled of old books and the cologne Richard used to wear. Natalie's chest tightened with unexpected grief. Mr. Caldwell was there, along with a video setup. Mr. Townsend recorded this 6 months before he passed. He wanted you to see it, but only after the will reading. The screen flickered to life, and there was Richard, looking frailer than she remembered, but with those same kind eyes.
"Hello, Natalie."
If you're watching this, then you've just been through quite an ordeal, and I apologize for that. I imagine my children are furious. The media is having a field day, and you're questioning everything. Let me clear some things up. I was not senile or confused when I changed my will. I was thinking more clearly than I had in years. My children are not bad people, but they were raised in privilege and learned to see art as commodity. That's partly my fault. I gave them everything except the understanding of why beauty matters. You, Natalie, you understand. That day you cried in front of the Vermeer, remember? You said you were overwhelmed by how much loneliness and hope could exist in a single moment captured in paint. That's when I knew. I'm not giving you this collection to make you rich. I'm giving it to you because you'll do what I should have done years ago. You'll find a way to share it. To let school children stand in front of a Monet and feel what we felt. To let working families spend Sunday afternoons, surrounded by beauty they thought was only for the wealthy. There's enough money in the trust to maintain the mansion. It's been in fun programs for at least 50 years. I've even left detailed suggestions in my papers about setting up a community art center. But the specific details, those are up to you. I trust your judgment far more than my own at this point. Don't let my children bully you. Don't let the media shame you. And most importantly, don't walk away from this, because it feels uncomfortable. Discomfort is just growth in disguise. You taught me that. Make something beautiful with this gift, Natalie. Make something that would have made my Catherine smile. She always said art should be a bridge, not a wall. Prove her right. And thank you truly for being exactly who you are. The screen went dark. Natalie sat in silence, tears flowing freely now, not from sadness, but from understanding. Richard hadn't just given her a fortune. He had given her a mission, a purpose that aligned perfectly with everything she believed in. Mrs. Albright handed her a tissue. "He talked about you often, you know. He would sit in this study and reread the notes you left about different paintings. He told me once that you reminded him of his Catherine, not in looks but in spirit. Someone who saw the world as it could be, not just as it is." The decision that night, Natalie sat in the mansion's gallery, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of art. A cassette hung to her left. A stunning landscape by Winslow Homer graced the opposite wall. In the corner, a sculpture that museums would kill to acquire. She thought about Richard's words. It's about her students who had never seen original artwork outside of textbooks. About the families in her neighborhood who couldn't afford museum admission. About all the potential artists who never got the chance to stand before greatness and be inspired. Her phone rang. "Mr. Caldwell? Miss Rivers, I need to know your intentions. Penelope and Wesley are preparing a court challenge. If you're planning to walk away, I should know now." Natalie looked at the cassette painting, at the mother and child captured in such tender intimacy. She thought of Richard's face when they discussed this very piece, how he had shared that his own mother used to hold him just like that. "I'm not walking away," she said firmly. "Mr. Caldwell, can you recommend someone who specializes in nonprofit law? I want to establish the Richard Townsend Community Art Center. Free admission. Educational programs for schools. Weekend workshops for families. Everything he wanted. Everything we talked about making accessible. She could hear the smile in the lawyer's voice.
Right. I think I know just the person.
Mr. Townsend would be very proud. As she hung up, Natalie felt something shift inside her. This wasn't about proving herself to Penelope and Wesley. This wasn't about defending against accusations or winning a legal battle. This was about honoring a promise she hadn't known she had made, about taking a gift and transforming it into something that would touch thousands of lives. Richard had seen in her something she had barely seen in herself, the courage to think bigger, to dream beyond her small apartment and struggling paycheck. He had given her not just art and money, but permission to become who she was always meant to be. Tomorrow, the fight would begin in earnest. But tonight, surrounded by beauty and possibility, Natalie finally understood what Richard had been trying to tell her all along. Some inheritances aren't measured in dollars. They're measured in the lives you touch and the dreams you make possible for others. The battle lines are drawn. The courtroom was cold and formal. Nothing like the warm gallery where Natalie had spent so many afternoons with Richard. She sat beside Mr. Caldwell and his recommended nonprofit specialist, Jennifer Hartwick, a sharp woman in her 50s who had built her career defending artistic legacies. Across the aisle, Penelope and Wesley sat with their attorney, Bradford Hutchins, a man known for his ruthless tactics in estate litigation. He had already given several interviews to the press, painting Natalie as a calculating opportunist who had preyed on a vulnerable widower. The judge, Honorable Grace Montgomery, was in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for being fair but thorough. She reviewed the documents before her with careful attention. "This is a challenge to the will of Richard James Townsend," she began. "The petitioners claim undue influence and question the testator's mental capacity at the time the will was executed. Let's hear opening statements." Bradford Hutchins stood, his expensive suit catching the fluorescent lights. "Your Honor, this case is about a young woman who saw an opportunity and took it. Richard Townsend was a grieving widower, isolated from his family, when Miss Rivers entered his life under the guise of professional employment. She systematically cultivated a relationship with him, knowing full well he was vulnerable and wealthy. The result? His own children, who stood by him for 40 years, were essentially disinherited, while a woman he knew for 6 months received everything. This isn't justice, Your Honor. This is exploitation." Natalie felt her stomach turn. Hearing her kindness toward Richard twisted into something sinister made her feel sick. Jennifer Hartwick stood next, her voice calm and confident. "Your Honor, what the petitioners call exploitation, the evidence will show, was genuine friendship. Based on shared passion for art and culture, Mr. Townsend was examined by 3 independent physicians in the months before and after changing his will, all certified his complete mental competence. He left detailed written and video testimony explaining his reasoning. This isn't a case of undue influence. It's a case of adult children angry that their father chose to create a lasting legacy rather than simply enriching them further. The testimony begins. The first week brought a parade of witnesses. Penelope testified about her father's declining health, painting a picture of a confused old man easily swayed by anyone who showed him attention. Started forgetting things, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Names, dates, where he put things. He became fixated on this art catalog project with Miss Rivers. It was all he talked about. Looking back, I can see how she must have planted ideas in his head during those long hours alone together. On cross-examination, Jennifer was surgical. "Mrs. Townsend Harrison, when was the last time you visited your father before he changed his will?" Penelope hesitated. "I'm not sure exactly. Let me refresh your memory. According to phone records and calendar entries, you saw your father twice in the 8 months before the will was changed. Both times were at charity events where you were photographed together. Does that sound right? I have a busy life. I run a gallery. Yet you're now deeply concerned about who influenced him during a period when you rarely visited. Interesting." Wesley's testimony was similar. He described his father as increasingly isolated and possibly depressed, making him vulnerable to manipulation. But under cross-examination, he admitted he had primarily communicated with Richard through lawyers. regarding business matters and had declined multiple invitations to visit the mansion for dinner. The medical experts changed the dynamics entirely. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a neurologist who had examined Richard just 2 months before he changed his will, was unequivocal. Mr. Townsend was sharp as a tack, she testified. We did comprehensive cognitive testing. His memory, reasoning, and judgment were all within normal ranges for his age. In fact, he scored higher than average on several measures. There was absolutely no indication of diminished capacity. The second doctor and psychiatrist confirmed the same findings. Richard had been completely competent, fully aware of his decisions, and clear about his intentions. The private investigators report the turning point came midway through the second week, when Bradford Hutchins called a private investigator named Dennis Kowalski to the stand. Natalie's heart sank. She knew what was coming. "Mr. Kowalski, what did your investigation into Miss Rivers reveal?" Investigator pulled out a folder. Miss Rivers was in significant debt 3 years ago when she began working for Mr. Townsend. Student loans, credit cards, medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment. She was barely making rent. So she had financial motivation. "Objection," Jennifer called. "Having financial struggles doesn't prove manipulation. Half of America would be guilty of undue influence by that standard." Sustained, Judge Montgomery said. "Mr. Hutchins, get to something relevant." But the damage was done. The jury of public opinion, watching from the gallery and through news reports, now saw Natalie as desperate and calculating. During the lunch break, Natalie sat in a conference room with her legal team. Feeling defeated. "They're making me look like a gold digger," she said quietly. "Let them," Jennifer replied. "Because we have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth." In Richard's own words, Richard speaks from beyond that afternoon. The courtroom watched Richard's video testimony. Every word, every gesture, every explanation. The room was silent as Richard detailed his reasoning, his hopes, and his explicit instructions that Natalie was to create a community art center. "I know my children will be angry," Richard said on screen. "They'll claim I was confused or manipulated. But I'm making this video specifically to address that. I am of completely sound mind. I've been examined by doctors at my own request to prove this point. I'm making this decision because it's right. Penelope and Wesley are getting $2 million each. That's more than most people see in a lifetime. They're not being abandoned or disinherited. They're simply not getting everything. Because I have a greater purpose for my collection. I want children from every background to stand in front of these paintings and feel what I felt when I first discovered art as a boy. I want beauty to be accessible, not imprisoned. And I trust Natalie Rivers to make that happen because she understands what wealth really means. Not accumulation, but distribution. Not hoarding, but sharing." When the video ended, even Judge Montgomery looked moved. Several people in the gallery were crying. Penelope sat rigid, her face pale. Wesley stared at his hands. Natalie takes the stand. Jennifer had warned her this would be the hardest part. "They're going to try to rattle you, to make you look guilty or uncertain. Just tell the truth, stay calm, and remember why you're doing this." Bradford Hutchins approached like a predator. "It's Miss Rivers. Isn't it true that you deliberately cultivated a relationship with Richard Townsend, knowing he was worth millions?" "No. I was hired to do a job. The relationship that developed was based on genuine mutual respect. But you spent hours alone with him, didn't you? Long evenings in his study, intimate conversations. We discussed art and life. There was nothing inappropriate. How convenient that these innocent discussions resulted in you inheriting $18 million. And I never asked for anything. I didn't even know he was considering this. But you knew he was wealthy. You knew he was lonely. You knew he was vulnerable after his wife's death." Natalie felt her composure start to crack, but then she remembered Richard's face, the way he smiled when she explained why she loved teaching. "Mr. Townsend wasn't vulnerable," she said firmly. "He was thoughtful, intelligent, and purposeful. He knew exactly what he wanted to do with his legacy. The fact that it doesn't align with what his children wanted doesn't make it invalid. It makes it his choice. His choice or your manipulation." "Objection." Jennifer was on her feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Hutchins, ask questions, don't make speeches. But Natalie wasn't finished. Something in her had shifted, a quiet strength rising. May I say something, Your Honor? Judge Montgomery nodded. Go ahead, Miss Rivers. I loved Richard Townsend, but not the way everyone is implying. I loved him the way you love a mentor, a friend, someone who sees the best in you and challenges you to live up to it. He changed my life, not with money, but with belief. He believed I could do something meaningful with his collection, and he was right. I can. I will. And if his children can't understand that, it's not because he was confused. It's because they never really knew him at all. The courtroom was silent. Even Bradford Hutchins seemed momentarily stunned. The letters that proved everything, Jennifer. His final piece of evidence was a collection of letters Richard had written over the years to various friends and colleagues, discovered in his personal papers. They painted a consistent picture of a man frustrated with his children's materialistic values and increasingly determined to create a meaningful legacy. One letter to his longtime friend, museum curator James Whitmore, written 2 years before Natalie ever met Richard, was particularly damning to the challenge. My children see my art collection as a future payday. They've already started cataloging pieces for auction. It breaks my heart, James. Catherine and I spent 50 years building this collection because we believed in preserving beauty for future generations. Now it's just going to be scattered to the highest bidders. I need to find another way. Another letter, written just months before he changed his will, mentioned Natalie directly. I've finally found someone who understands what I've been trying to articulate for years. A young teacher who sees art as transformation, not transaction. She reminds me why I started collecting in the first place. I think I found my solution. James, I'm going to put everything in her hands and trust that she'll do what's right. Wesley and Penelope's attorney tried to argue these letters were evidence of Richard's growing instability. But the medical evidence contradicted that narrative at every turn. The verdict after 3 weeks of testimony. Judge Montgomery called for closing arguments. Jennifer delivered a passionate speech about artistic legacy, genuine friendship, and the right of every person to distribute their property as they see fit. Bradford. Hutchins made one last attempt to paint Natalie as manipulative, but his arguments rang hollow against the mountain of evidence showing Richard's clarity and intent. The judge took only 2 days to render her decision. This court has reviewed extensive testimony, medical evidence, documented communications, and video testimony from the deceased. While the petitioner's pain at receiving less than expected is understandable, pain does not constitute grounds for overturning a legally sound will. Richard Townsend was demonstrably competent when he made these decisions. He left clear explanations for his choices. The relationship between Mr. Townsend and Miss Rivers, while unusual, does not meet the legal standard for undue influence. By all accounts, it was a genuine friendship based on shared interests. Furthermore, Mr. Townsend's stated intention was to create public access to his art collection, a goal that aligns with his documented values and previous charitable activities. This court sees no reason to override his explicitly stated wishes. The challenge is denied. The will stands as written. Penelope let out a small cry. Wesley simply stood and walked out, his face expressionless. Natalie sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Jennifer squeezed her hand. You won? Now comes the hard part, making his dream real. 6 months later, the grand opening of the Richard Townsend Community Art Center drew crowds that stretched down the block. Families waited patiently for their chance to enter the beautifully restored mansion, now transformed into a public space while maintaining its elegant character. Natalie stood in the main gallery, watching a little girl stare up at the Cossat painting with wide eyes. The child's mother, clearly working class based on her worn jacket, had tears streaming down her face. I never thought I'd see something like this in person, the woman whispered. Thank you for making this free. My daughter loves to draw, but we can't afford museum trips. That's exactly why this place exists, Natalie replied. Her own eyes missed. Mrs. Albright had stayed on as the center's hospitality coordinator, greeting visitors with the same warmth she had once shown Natalie. The mansion felt alive again. filled with voices and laughter and wonder. Penelope and Wesley had eventually accepted the judge's ruling, though they declined invitations to the opening. Natalie held no bitterness toward them. She understood their hurt, even if she couldn't change it. That evening, after the last visitors left, Natalie walked through the quiet galleries alone. She stopped in Richard's old study, where his portrait now hung above the fireplace. In the painting, he was smiling, surrounded by some of his favorite pieces. "We did it," she whispered. "Your dream is real now." Every week, hundreds of people walk through these doors and see beauty they thought was beyond their reach. Children discover art for the first time. Teachers bring their classes. Families spend Sunday afternoons here together. You were right, Richard. Beauty isn't meant to be hoarded. It's meant to be shared. She pulled out the letter he had written her, now carefully preserved in a frame on the desk. The final lines still moved her every time she read them. "You gave an old man his joy back. Now I'm giving you the means to spread that joy further than I ever could." Outside, the Boston skyline glittered in the twilight. Tomorrow, another 100 people would walk through these doors. Next week, a school group from a struggling neighborhood was scheduled to visit. Next month, they were launching free art classes for children who couldn't otherwise afford lessons. Richard hadn't just given her art and property. He had given her purpose, validation, and the profound gift of being truly seen and trusted. In return, she was making sure that his legacy would touch lives for generations to come.